Hello. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started if everyone can find their seats. Hi, everyone. I just want to welcome you all to the Michigan Daily's newsroom. I'm Emma Kurd, the managing news editor. And I want to just first start by thanking all of our talented writers who are reading their stories tonight. They have so much courage, so thank you guys so much. And thanks, everyone, for being here. Tonight's theme is about health, physical, emotional, spiritual, and sexual. And I know that these are topics that hit home for a lot of us. Sometimes one of the hardest things to do is to acknowledge when we're not okay to ourselves and to others. And tonight is about making that acknowledgement. It's about being able to say, I'm not okay, and for that to be okay. And I hope that going forward tonight and throughout the year, the Michigan Daily can be a place for student voices and stories to be heard and shared. It can be a community, and that's what tonight is all about. So thank you all so much for coming. And with that, I'm going to start with our first reader, Mimi Zach.
Hi, everybody. Okay, really quick because this is a funny story and I need to explain why I'm in this dress. I am going to a date party right after this. Now, who is in one or has been in one of John Rubido's classes? Raise your hand. Anybody? Okay, we got one. But John Rubido makes you write evaluations for everybody's essay, and that's what I'm going to read tonight, my essay from his class. And in this class, I had a guy in it that I asked to what a date party about 2 years ago when I was still in my sorority, and I asked this guy and he said no, he was going to Papa Diosio concert. Well, an hour later, my dad calls me and says, hey, Mimi, I'm going to Papa Diosio concert on Friday. Can you tell me some cool songs to listen to? This guy, my date party was on Friday, so my dad found out that for me that I was stood up by a guy. So the guy never found out. Long story short, I wrote all of this in an evaluation for his essay at the thing, and now I'm going to a date party with him tonight. So I thought that'd be a good way to start and explain that. So I feel a little less weird. So here we go. My essay from John Rubido's class. For a little bit of context, I lived in Boston this summer and I attended 20 rock concerts by myself. And this is an essay about that, titled Rock Concerts by Myself, appropriately. All right. Grab the bottle of half-drunk red wine from the kitchen counter. The bottle belonged to your beautiful roommate and her beautiful boyfriend last Monday. They paired the wine with something savory and physically sweet. Grab the bottle and don't take a glass. No one is home. You are free of judgment now. Bring the bottle to your room. Gaze at your reflection in the dusty mirror on your desk. Blue eyes so dark that they're almost gray. Your mother's button nose, your father's thick lips, manageable eyebrows, manageable acne. You have about as much ethnic flair as Jan Brady. Tonight especially, your average features will require some work. You could use at least one eccentrically placed beauty mark or a small nose piercing, something discreet enough to hide from your mother in pictures. You need something just a little more interesting. Grab the bottle and take a sip. You could use some red on your lips. You've paired the red wine with your empty stomach, now pair the music with your solitude. No one is home, so volume is of no concern. Your sonic options are endless, but of course you've already prepared for this. You've coursed through the confines of your digital music library. You have sound. What is it with this obsession? Why do you prepare for moments such as these? You know the answer. You're hiding behind it. You spend too much time with music, too much time with your headphones in, maybe too much time alone. Human connection isn't as scary as you think, dear. Turn to the speaker system. It's a violent shade of red. Your parents gave it to you for your 11th birthday. And when you were 11, you would only play Sex Pistol records from the speakers. You were never cooler. When you were 13, you would only play Jay-Z's The Black Album. You were trying to connect with your angry father. Only play Otis Redding. You were learning to cry again after your sister died. When you were 16, you would only play Beethoven from those speakers. You were obsessively practicing piano concertos for 3 hours a day. When you were 17, you would only play Neil Young records. You were memorizing all of Neil's lyrics for some shaggy-haired boy with a guitar. Grab the auxiliary cord now. Plug your phone in and play some music. Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders plays first. Turn to your closet. Now just try to pull together something that would make Chrissy Hind a little proud. Put on the concert tee from the 8th grade. No, you're trying too hard. Black high-waisted pants, yes, that's fine. And pair those with some silky crop shirt. Show a little skin. But you're going to pair it all with the old navy faux leather jacket? Fine, whatever, that will do. You look nice. No, that's incorrect. You look how you think you should look. Uncaring, guarded, and trying a little too hard. Are you intentionally parodying yourself? Whatever, yes, you do look like you're going to a rock concert by yourself. Laid by James is playing now. Remember this song? You blasted it in the car the morning after losing your virginity. Alone in your car, smudged makeup and still wearing his boxers, you screamed lyrics about sexual insanity. You preferred that morning after to the entirety of the night before. Ponder that. Realize, darling, how revealing time can be. Turn back to the mirror on your desk. Brush the dust off the glass with your sleeve. Take another swig out of the bottle before you start fumbling around in your makeup bag. 4 years spent in a private, all-girls Catholic school has placed some Christian curse on your ability to apply makeup properly. You never really did repent enough. Find the dark colors. Yes, those ones. They will match both the blackness of your jeans and mind. Take another sip of wine to steady your hand and then just paint your face. Start to apply the matted, colorful dust where it seems most appropriate. Tickle your eyelids with the smooth gray. Color in the edges of your eye with the darkest black. Think of what the beautiful roommate would do. Try and recreate that. Make your eyes dark, make your face as moody as your mind. Cut Your Hair by Pavement should be playing now. Resist the urge to take scissors and cut yourself some bangs. Preserve the spontaneous decision for another time when you want to test the boundaries of your differentness. The patent leather Steve Madden platforms that you spent your summer savings on should be at the edge of your closet door. Put them on. Your 5-foot, 3-inch frame craves them. Stuff your wallet and the wrinkled concert tee into your worn-out leather purse. It's the one your mother bought when she lived in Compton, California. Remind yourself of your beautiful mother. Remember what she told you the night you called her crying. First off, I don't even think you liked him that much. And second, you're wasted on him. But do use these changing times to dress a little sexier. Trust the woman who gave birth to you. Trust the homecoming queen from Buffalo, New York. Trust the strongest woman you've ever known. Tighten the buckle on the historic purse. Grab the bottle once again. Bring it down to the cozy shag rug on your bedroom floor and lie your body down. Nurse the bottle to completion. Blast Sonic Youth's song Cool Thing. Following Ms. Gordon's 4-minute ballad on female oppression. Leave your apartment. Leave it now, for God's sake. And try to walk with your hips. Emulate Ms. Gordon's palpable disdain of everything patriarchal in this world. It's 9:30. The show started at 7. You are late and the taxi is here. Slide the door closed once you're inside the vehicle. Small talk is the enemy whose hands grip the wheel. Don't speak. It will only reveal your mild inebriation. Condescension and indifference are the dark eye makeup on your face and heavy platforms on your feet. Sit prostrate in the back seat. Mumble the venue to small talk in the front seat. Maintain monotone, curt responses. You're too cool, even if you're not, and you're carefree, although you're definitely not. Once you arrive at the venue, do your best to fluidly exit the vehicle. Be sure to deliver a small thank you to small talk, and then pray that those are the last words you have to utter tonight. Let your eyes adjust to the downtown landscape. Resist the urge to look down. Press your eyes up, you coward, and look around. The stigma of being alone never bothered you before. The time has arrived. Guard yourself with an armor of Cool Thing. Enter the dark, dirty music venue. You're late. You knew the opening band, but they just stepped off stage. If he were here, you know he would scowl at your lateness. If he were here, you would worry about him having a good time. And if he were here, you would almost tangibly feel his insecurities. You will think that you should miss him. You will think that you should cower and cry, but you won't. Only Otis makes you cry. Hurry up and hand your ticket to the box office now. Get it scanned. Your dizzy thoughts have left your expressive face looking strange, and the fat bouncer is staring. The air is thick, the floor is sticky, and the demographic of the surrounding individuals is assorted. There are those groups of pseudo-fans, pseudo-friends, and pseudo-lovers bunched together in this hall of inexplicable grime. Stop that now. You can't judge them. Don't even try. You bought the same Urban Outfitters beanie, and you own all those same fake emotions. Stroll over to the bar and order yourself a whiskey ginger with lime. You've never had one before. You bought the drink because you heard it mentioned in a song once. It's a song that you and your little sister love. If she were here, she would justifiably judge you for fulfilling this cliche. She would mock you for the drink, and she would tease you for you and your visible angst. You will miss her then. You will crave her rational mind and intense intellectual depth. You will miss her height and beauty. Your greatest success is in being her older sister. You should always remember that. Pay for your drink as soon as it arrives. Some speckled older man in tweed is trying to make eyes with you from 4 bar stools away. Play with this temptation, but quickly let it pass. There is no chance you're being touched tonight. Don't make eye contact with the pretty people. Bury that hopeless romantic. Hide that lovesick fool. The lights dim, the band walks on stage, the guitarist begins some powerful progression, the lead singer grabs the microphone and the drummer starts to play. Start to follow the syncopated bobbing of the people around you. Sway your head with the lyrics, start to tap with your feet. You are so good at finding the rhythm, and you are so good at finding the beat. Now dance a little and do it strangely. You really are an eccentric individual. Appreciate yourself in this moment. Go and find a spot in the crowd. Surround yourself with these people you don't know. Blindly, they are your cheerleaders. They won't doubt you, they won't judge you, and they won't make you talk about you. You don't have to be yourself tonight. No one alone at some rock concert ever has to be. Night will end far too quickly. The passage of time, it isn't as noticeable when you're at a rock concert. The band gives one last slow song. They deliver one last bow. Turn to the bar and order another drink. The rushed exits of the people around you will give you anxiety. Have another whiskey ginger with lime and wait. The subway isn't going anywhere. You have nowhere to be, no one to see, and no one to be. Leave around 1 a.m. The bar closes at 1:30 a.m. Despite how romantic the songs make it seem, there is little catharsis to be found in drinking alone at some bar. Make your way down the street to the subway's entrance and swipe your debit card for payment. Meander over to the entrance of the C train. Find yourself a spot on it and settle in. Paw through your bag for your headphones. Turn on the phone and ignore the text message from your mom. Answer that tomorrow. Find your music, press shuffle. Fake Empire by The National started to play. The night I played this song for him was the same night he left. He told me I was too independent, too different, and better off alone. That pretty confused fool with all of his half smiles and good times had no idea what his words would mean. All those words, all that ill-conceived nothingness, materialized myself into my self-doubts and deprecations. That mistaken boy disliked the Kim Gordon in me as much as I thought I should. Sitting there on that padded Bostonian subway bench, I stared across the aisle at my reflection in the glass. See the poorly drawn, smudged eye makeup on my face. I noticed the faint red on the outer edges of my mouth, the remnants of the red wine. I observed how poorly my Old Navy jacket fit. I saw my mother's nose and my father's lips, my simple features that had failed to be strange. For the first time since that night, I didn't change the song. I let it play, and as it did, I started to smile at my foggy reflection. The smile turned into a giggle, and then the giggle into a laugh. And once the 3 minutes and 25 seconds of the song ended, I pulled my knees up to my chest and hugged them close. I let the song play on repeat until I reached my Harvard Square exit. I stood up and made my way to the cold sliding doors. Leaning against metal, waiting to leave, I closed my eyes and let the smile on my face grow. Ever so quietly, under my breath, I whispered my realization to the empty subway car. I prefer rock concerts by myself.
Thank you. All right, next we have a story from Claire Bryan.
Okay, I thought I was going third, so this is exciting. Uh, okay, I wrote this essay, which is incredibly long, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's about insomnia and kind of troubles sleeping that I've had. I don't know if I should call it insomnia or not, if it's that serious or not. But yeah, I wrote it. I'm going to kind of jump around and then tell you guys like the story in between because I think that's better than making you sit through the whole thing. And I also have like journal entries like put in throughout. So if I switch into like the present tense, that's intentional. Okay. As I type these words, I have coursing waves of nerves brushing up and down through the inside of me. They originate in my gut, folded up behind my top abdominal in the fleshy part of the cartilage that connects my top two ribs to my sternum. Sometimes a wave of nerve comes every time I take a breath in. Sometimes a wave of nerves comes when I hear a noise. Sometimes a wave of nerves doesn't come, and the lack of its not coming surprises me. I think about the lack of it, why this time the wave is absent, and like clockwork, the wave does come. It knows that I'm thinking about it. So last September, I moved into a sorority house with 55 other girls. A sorority house is a lot of things. Loud is a very good place to start. Floors creak, doors slam, voices travel sharply and into every corner of the house. I wish I could say I had trouble sleeping because I woke up when I heard a noise. Or I wish I could say I had trouble sleeping because I laid in bed for a couple hours thinking about the homework looming over my head, or how I didn't want to spend the next summer at home in San Diego like I had in the past, or my recent and only breakup with a boy who had been my best friend for years. Though all of those things I did wake up to and did think about. But sound is sound and thoughts are thoughts, and the two didn't add up to me never sleeping. As the weeks got colder and I remembered how foreign scarves and boots looked on me, I told my 3 roommates and myself that I had a lot on my mind. "How'd you sleep?" was the most common, courteous greeting, but when directed at me became an ache in my chest. It still is. I didn't bother saying much more than okay, because though some people are light sleepers and might understand if I had said not great, saying I don't think I ever fell asleep last night is not a breakfast table conversation that anyone wants to have. In quiet moments, I did say that last phrase, but the conversation fell bitterly silent because I didn't really have much to say after that initial observation. Friends would ask why, and I'd try to explain what I was thinking about, but ultimately I'd end in saying to them, I don't really get it. They wouldn't either. I began going to sleep as early as I could, crawling into the corner of my top bunk bed around 11. I'd lie for hours listening for each roommate to come home through the heavy door. 1, 2 hours, 3 hours passing. All right, everyone was home, I thought. Then I'd lie watching for that sinking into sleep feeling to overcome me. When it wasn't coming, I'd become frustrated that I wasn't getting sleep, nor was I getting work done. This intersection of two non-productive truths was a driving center point that I fixated on. Some nights around 5 or 6 in the morning, I think I drifted behind my thoughts into a light sleep. At 7 a.m., my roommate's alarm would go off and she dressed to go on a run, and I was wide awake. I drank coffee and went to class, and I went to meetings and wrote my stories for the student newspaper. And though I was exhausted each day that passed, I reasoned with myself. I was stressed and college was noisy. I identified what happened at night in terms of when my roommates came home and when I heard a noise and nothing more. I told myself I was okay in the morning, and throughout the day I could almost forget I even told myself that. For weeks it was survivable, months later it was unbearable. But that was the trickiest part of all of this, and still is. There's a lot of truth in that simple phrase, I am okay. Okay, then I go through like some scenes where I take a lot of NyQuil. But we're gonna skip that. And then I ultimately, around February, decide to go to therapy, as every young millennial should. Okay. The first week of therapy, I sat in a small waiting room. Sorry, the first week of February, I sat in a small waiting room with 6 black chairs and a coffee table piled high with newspapers and 2 different succulent plants. I was shaking just slightly as I scrambled to fill in the mountain of papers on my lap that I was supposed to complete before my first appointment at Ann Arbor Consulting Services. Please list who you live with, your relationship to them, a description of who they are you satisfied with this relationship, yes or no? I began laughing, a shallow laugh out loud at myself. A girl or lady, she looked around 25, sitting 2 seats away, looked over. Harsh, black-framed glasses dominated her face. Her hair was red and pixie cut. I wondered why she was here. And then I hated myself for asking that question, hated myself for living every cliche movie scene of a therapist's waiting room where the main character dreams up what everyone's problem is. I wrote down 55, then the word girls, then paused for a moment and eventually wrote the word friends. The ballpoint pen I was using left a black blob of excess ink at the start of the F of the word friends. My handwriting looked ugly. I couldn't muster much else more to begin to justify what my life was in a sorority. Justifying how I couldn't imagine my life without it brought its very own anxieties. Okay. So basically I go to therapy and she diagnoses me with general anxiety disorder because like as I fall asleep, I get anxious about the fact that I can't sleep. And so then like that anxiousness makes you fall asleep because like, as you probably know, once you're anxious, you're like very awake. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, this is also something everyone knows, but anxiety is the most common mental illness in the United States. I paid a lot of money and spent a lot of mornings hoping my sister's car that wasn't built for snowy roads would survive a 10-minute drive to a therapist's office to be diagnosed with the most general disorder that exists in the world. And now I, too, was this basic denominator. I was the statistic written at the top of news articles addressing mental health awareness. I've typed the word insomnia into Google a few hundred times. Insomnia can be classified into 4 categories: transient, insomnia lasting a single night or a few weeks; intermittent, if transient episodes occur from time to time; chronic, if insomnia occurs most nights and lasts a month or more; or secondary, when insomnia is a side effect of another problem. This insomnia is a symptom of an emotional, neurological, or other medical disorder. I believe I've experienced all 4 of these types. The most prominent and almost the hardest to accept is the secondary type. My anxiety gives me insomnia. But I don't know if those words are true, because the word insomnia and the word anxiety can very much be reversed in that sentence. My insomnia gave me anxiety. Because I could have sworn to you those first nights not sleeping, there were no waves of nerves. I just simply couldn't sleep. Or were the waves of nerves there and I just didn't have a word to call them by? Did defining them anxiety make them occur more often? Did identifying a problem help solve it or simply and boldly accentuate it? This is the room we have available at this time. It's typically for younger patients. I apologize. I was told this on my first day of therapy as I entered a room painted blue full of puzzles and toy blocks. I made a joke about loving puzzles, grabbed a piece, and played with it between my pointer finger and my thumb as I thought. I spent an hour on a couch every week. I practiced cognitive behavioral therapy on white worksheets. I talked a lot. I didn't hate it. I learned a lot, how my brain had created unhealthy synapses where, when I heard one noise, no matter how small, I jumped to thinking that I would never be able to fall asleep, when in truth, it was a pretty small noise. How other things, like not going to bed on time or it not being fully dark in the room, linked another unhealthy jump in my mind, telling me that I'll never be able to sleep. Every time these synapses fire, they create deeper and deeper grooves in my neurological paths that release anxious feelings within me. My brain was making these well-worn grooves, and I had to train it to not follow down the same problematic grooves every night. I learned something really heartbreaking about the freedom of thought. I used to believe that every thought was your own and was healthy and true and deserved to be thought about and explored. I learned that this wasn't true. Then over the summer, I participated in the New England Literature Program, which many of you know about, where you spend a bunch of weeks out in the woods with no technology taking English classes. And essentially your sleeping conditions are just like absolutely awful because it's like freezing and you're in a tent and you're sleeping on the ground, and it sucks in terms of like conditions. But I was able to sleep like a baby. I don't know. I was able to sleep really well. And so that was cool because I didn't think I was going to be able to do that. But as I write here, despite all the unhealthy synapsing inducing factors, I was able to sleep. Now I'm gonna like jump ahead to this year. Yeah, and this is the end, okay. This year, as I folded sheets under my mattress and pushed pins into a tapestry to hang on my wall, I told myself I was constructing a purposeful place to sleep. I told myself it was gonna be different this year. It is different, of course it is. But sleep doesn't come like it did in New Hampshire or in San Diego or in Washington, D.C., where I spent the rest of the summer. It seems to remember that it's unwelcome here in Ann Arbor. Sometimes I go to class with the old exhaustion, but sometimes there are days when someone answers my question of how are you with good but tired, and I feel like I can actually relate because I feel that normal amount of tired. There is never a night I fall asleep, that luxurious sinking feeling that I miss effortlessly. The second week of the semester, I sat on a black couch and a boy asked me to explain why I said I didn't want to see him anymore after a very sudden and short amount of time. I scrambled with too many words trying to explain how I have problems sleeping and don't understand it fully, and his presence in my life added more waves of nerves and less sleep. I didn't say that. I said, Claire, that's the point. You have general anxiety disorder. You don't have to explain it. It's a clinical disorder. Maybe he's right. Maybe I need to get better at understanding the clinical part of my disorder. Maybe I need to pull out that white piece of paper that has my diagnosis on it and study it, learn to cope with the tangible symptoms of anxiety. to accept that my insufficiencies are excused by my diagnosis. Maybe my exhaustion will finally evaporate if I can stop trying to solve my anxiety to cure it. But here's the difference. It is not as simple as what all the thought catalogs and WordPress blogs from every anxiety-suffering teen who preaches to accept yourself and become not a statistic, but a normality. Because I have tasted curedness. When I was in New Hampshire, I was strong. I know that I don't have to live sleepless. There's something sickening attached to what I learned in therapy, attached to this clinical part. I learned that my brain, myself, created unhealthy neurological pathways. I made so many unhealthy choices that I gave myself a disorder. Though I'm trying to pull myself out of those deep problematic neurological pathways, I'm haunted by this idea that I gave myself a disorder. It is a strange sensation to watch oneself in very real, tangible ways change into a person you don't recognize. Last year, I noticed I'd creep away from loud conversations and into the confines of my bedroom. Outside of my house, I noticed when conversations got loud more often and I would remove myself away from them, not commenting or speaking up. In these awake times, there were never waves of anxiety. So why was I creating distance between myself and the people around me? Why, when I genuinely liked and wanted to share my life with the people, was I reverting more inwardly than ever? So this week, which was actually a long time ago, like last semester, I sat on each of my roommates' beds and I challenged myself to explain my insomnia, something I always struggled to make public. As I opened my mouth, an elevator speech of what my insomnia is like flowed from my mouth, and strangely, I didn't hate it. I said it 7 times to each of them, and for the first time in a long time, I recognized and liked the sound of my own voice. I wasn't explaining a diagnosis. I wasn't explaining a definition of insomnia that I had Googled. I was explaining, quite simply, me. Just like those deep grooves that are the neurological pathways in my brain, I'm typing these words to create new grooves that lead to a healthy explanation of my anxiety. I'm pulling myself out of the problematic ones, and I'm remapping my brain. I'll now always think of my anxiety as not general, not the same most common mental disorder in the country, not everyone else's. I'll think of it as this peculiar hybrid disorder that surfaces only in this unique arena right before and right after sleep. Sleep is a romantic time between self-awareness and self-lostness, and I feel lucky that my anxiety allows me to exist so alert in these times. They might be the most important. I'll share what I can about this precious part of me, and I'll know that sharing feels reassuring and rewarding, but I won't forget that there is beauty in the nuances of my secret. There will always be a little bit of all of this that's still unsolved, and I'm not afraid, worried, or anxious to keep that part to myself. I'm going to create a new word for my type of anxiety, a precious type that only comes alive in the secret moments in between the conscious and the unconscious. That word will be all mine.
Thanks, Claire. Next, we're going to hear from Alex Fowler.
All right. Raise this up. Hi, everybody. So what I'm going to talk about essentially is just, well, I feel like maybe as many of us have, I guess, learned from being in college that we all sort of have like a personal journey that we go through. But what I'm going to talk about is just a journey of my own. And this journey that I'm talking about, it was recently posted like online, like on a sports forum. So this is just a shorter version of that. And when I talk about in here what I describe as a rock bottom, is just a very dark place that I hope that not a lot of people have ever had to go through. So 2.4 miles of swimming, 112 miles of biking, 26.2 miles of running. 1 day of mental and physical toughness in exchange for a lifetime of glory, or at least what I was told to expect. Every triathlete dreams of the opportunity to race an Ironman. At 20, some would say I took a less traditional approach to accomplishing one of the most challenging races on the international circuit. Some would say I had precise ambitions going into the race, but honestly, I just wanted to have fun. Type 2 fun, which is something that's only fun after you've stopped doing it. Most of Ironman Muskoka 2015 was a blur, but I remember most is how I spent my first few minutes after crossing the finish line. I walked away, medal around my neck, toward the lake that I swam in 11 hours earlier. While admiring the still, reflective water, I realized that the Ironman was the culmination of every athletic endeavor that I've ever set out to achieve. Although I thought I loved being a triathlete for love of the sport, now I understood exactly how it saved me. I'm the president of the University of Michigan triathlon team. I'm a sap for cute puppies, babies, and wool socks. I'm a coffee addict, and I'm openly gay. There were years in my life that when growing up, I never thought I'd be able to freely write openly gay. For years, I hated being in my own skin. I was afraid to accept my own weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and thus that anger could only be directed inward. I struggled with major depressive disorder. My insecurities ate away at my sense of self. I couldn't have a guy, straight or gay, look at me for 5 seconds without being insecure, feeling threatened, worthless, or helpless, and that I would never live a life of being truly happy. While society as a whole is making great progress towards universal equality and inclusion, there are still multitudes of people out there who are suffering from the stigma, hate, and cruelties which flock toward minority populations. And it is no surprise that these populations have higher rates of mental illness, among all others. I didn't have anyone to talk to, so I turned to running and sports in general, to avoiding my lack of self-confidence, to distract myself from accepting that it was okay to be gay, because frankly, I thought running was going to turn me straight. But that didn't help my insecurities. It only temporarily occupied my sense of self as by acting as a Band-Aid over the bigger issue at play. The wounds never healed, and while starting college at U of M, I was surrounded by a more supporting and acceptive community that was entirely new to me. My sexual identity and true sense of self only grew stronger. Guys started openly hitting on me, and I liked it. It was bizarre, and I did not know whether to accept the truth or keep living the lie. I had no idea how to act with my straight friends, especially at parties, Michigan being a Big Ten school, and we put college football and our social lives on a higher importance than our own sleep and nutrition. And through all of this, I thought I was ready to tell my parents. And many LGBTQ people create an expectation of how their ideal coming out will be orchestrated. And I knew what I wanted mine to be like with my parents. Unfortunately, I didn't get the initial reaction I was hoping for. One of my parents tried to convince me that I was in fact not gay and just too stressed from school to think rationally. And the other said that they had no suspicion whatsoever that I was gay, which my immediate response was, I've never had a serious girlfriend ever, and you've seen me watching marathons of Kathy Griffin. You're a rocket scientist and you really couldn't figure that one out. For weeks after that, our conversations and our encounters were scant, and meanwhile, my depression worsened. And through that, I battled my issues by doing what I knew how to distract myself from my problems, running. Running is my own personal therapy and has never turned away from me when I needed it. Running is the only thing that I can do where all my other thoughts just disappear, and all I can do is focus on moving forward and listen to the symphonies from each footstep. I joined the University of Michigan triathlon team my freshman year. I set goals for myself to help distract me from how depressed I was on the inside. I competed in our collegiate triathlon national championships. I saved up an entire summer worth of paychecks for my first triathlon bike. I completed a half Ironman, then ran a marathon and qualified for Boston, and completed a full Ironman triathlon. More and more as I accomplished my athletic goals, I gained more and more confidence that I am a worthy and capable human being. From being more involved in the triathlon team, I gained what I thought was a true sense of community, and I took a lot of pride in having friends and teammates who I could always rely on for social and moral support. Merely being able to talk in person about how attractive someone looks is a simple virtue that most heterosexual people take for granted. And how interesting it is that something as simple as a conversation can be misappropriated as a privilege. And it now seems that I'm living in the same life as I did before since coming out, but still looking at the world through an entirely different lens. The world is less scary, still a little uncertain, but entirely more radiant. It's easier to see the benefits of being out now that I'm here, but through several trips to rock bottom, I never thought I would be this happy. No rock bottom lasts forever, and you don't know how good everything is that you haven't lived to see yet. But if I didn't have these rock bottoms, I couldn't appreciate all these wonderful people and aspects of my life in it today. But the key to my own happiness and acceptance was always in my control. The fact was that life will take you on a lot of adventures, but it's up for you to decide how. The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. There is no race, religion, class system, color, or sexual orientation that makes us better than others. We are all deserving of love. We are all just blood and bone wrapped in fragility. Learn to align your ideal self with your real self. We have nothing to lose and a world to see. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Next, we're going to hear from Natalie Zach.
Hi guys. So God only knows I'm not keeping it together, but this story isn't about me. Well, it's a poem, which is like, I guess, a more pretentious form of a story. But it's about a friend of mine who took his life in early February. And yeah, so great guy. The composer. He was a voracious reader. In time, it would have been the knowledge that swallowed him whole, but the monster got to him first. It was stronger, more determined than any virtuose that fought to keep him alive, to keep his lungs rising, his heart beating, his eyes blinking. Those eyes, I can't remember those eyes. Brown or blue or yellow for all it matters. It didn't stop the water from rising, the anger from building, or the storm from brewing inside his small frame cloaked in dark, shaggy hair. Summer after summer, his hair grew longer as the blonde co-conspirator of his youth looked on in wonder of the boy that stood before him, in awe of the boy that looked just like him, in shock of the boy that no longer wanted to live beside him. Summer after summer, his hair grew longer until the gavel of sinister Our Fathers came crashing down on his godless youth and his hair was no longer there. He tinkered with his body, but he never abused it. No alcohol or drugs for him, only for us, all for us, because he was the black immobile with four sides that rested beside the words, Danny is. He was the square in a group of triangular and tenacious, for only pairs of two suited him. The night he pushed his way towards the stage and reached out in penultimate bliss, he came crashing down hours later, and no one could explain when the swarms of wasps had flown, why he was left alone, four sides falling away, no music but his own left in sight. But the noise in his head drowned out the music in his mind, and instead those 6 months were spent alone in solitude. Padded rooms were never fitting for a boy that told tales of Olivia's circus at Rikers Island, for a little girl sister whose tastes fit those of his, whose life revolved around him. And then the strangers proclaimed he had joy, had life, had time, as we whispered he had irony too. For of the hundreds present, his was the only body missing. Of the hundreds present at the funeral, his absence was the only one that mattered to those strangers who said he carried kindness in his soul, who said he preached the word of a God he never believed in. What I saw in the seat beside me all those weeks, all those years, was a kindred spirit, a common soul. One who saw through the paper, plastic, and cardboard, saw through the masquerades and charades, but asked too much from those who couldn't deliver. And because he asked too much, because he laughed and mocked the seamstress for the band and the childlike play of chemical character bonding, he took matters into his own hands. He took the wheel of a car into his own hands. And where he drove, no one knew until he reached the spot of reckoning, the spot where after all the failed attempts and hidden poisons, he could finally escape successfully into the night. So he drove, the blonde one said. He was an inexperienced driver, he said. He drove on the wing of a carbon monoxide angel to a river that claimed none before him. He called their mother, he said. And through the misplaced alcohol and cloud of smoke, those words rang through, clear and piercing as if they were the first words ever heard by a deaf man kneeling before his saint. But no saints were present at the edge of the falls, no angels, and no Jesus Christ and Lord our Saviors. For it wasn't holy water that welcomed him that night. It was the tune of Bobby Brown, Going Down, that welcomed the composer who left for his final tour just before 6 p.m. on Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Next, we're going to hear from Irene Park.
So I just want to thank the Daily for organizing this wonderful event, and for on a more personal reason, to give a little more context. I'm a graduate student at Michigan, and I work at a lab as a science doctoral student. And when you do experiments, for those of you who don't know, you have to be very accustomed to failures, and you become very accepting of situations that are out of your control, which is not a very good thing. Sometimes you become accepting of things that shouldn't be allowed to happen, and so on. So I just wanted to thank the Daily for being very welcoming for a graduate student like me, I guess, and also giving me that positive energy for me to actually realize that some things that I should just say no to and not be as accepting and so on. So this is actually kind of relevant for my essay, so that's why I decided to share. So my essay is titled Walking on a Tightrope. My mom would always tell me how shy and introverted I was as a little kid. When you are living with your grandparents and their friends come to visit, if you didn't recognize them right away, you would go into a room, shut the door, and start crying. Although that level of introversion hasn't carried over to the next 20-something years, thank God, I still think it's almost a miracle that I'm standing in front of an audience right now and frankly tell a story about myself without having a panic attack. Because I was such an introvert and moving close to 15 times in my life altogether, I'm 26 by the way, didn't help much either with forming long-lasting relationships and friendships. I would spend a ton of time by myself. Instead of playing outside with friends, I would read, watch TV, and maybe read some more. My body might as well have been tied to the bed and the desk in my room, but I didn't care. Some read for pleasure, to be entertained. But I like to travel to many places and time periods and live vicariously through so many characters in my books or shows. During the time that I was in love with the Harry Potter series, I would imagine myself as an original character at Hogwarts by the trio side, fighting Voldemort, or you know who, and whatnot. For any romance TV series, I love to pretend to be the female protagonist who stole hearts of many guys, because I was never that popular girl. I basically was whoever I wanted to be when I was reading or watching shows, which is something that parents tell their children when they are young, and the reality hasn't sunken in yet. And that is exactly what I realized. At some point in my life, my daydreams got further and further from reality. I started out as pretending that I was good at sports. I was pitifully unathletic. But after a while, I was the chosen one to save the world from some evil force in some fantasy land where magic and immortality existed. So you know the saying, ignorance is bliss. I totally felt that when I had the epiphany. Oh my God, my daydreams are not real. At this point, you might be thinking something like, did she really describe that as an epiphany? Yeah, I mean, I knew my daydreams weren't real, but I immersed myself in them anyway. They were my sanctuary, where I could be whatever I wanted to be. But more importantly, the world was whatever I wanted to be. I was purposely ignoring how idealistic my daydreams were. In that fantasy land, the good guys won. The bad guys always met their rightful demise. People got what they deserved. So when I had that epiphany and let that really sink in, I experienced some sort of a schism. A part of me wanted to live in my daydreams and chase after my dreams and values and believe that the world could be a certain way. Life is fair. All friendships are true friendships. There are no backstabbing and lies. Everyone shows endless compassion, and money doesn't matter. The other part of me recognized the reality of life all too well, compromising to move things along, ignoring a homeless person, talking to people just so I can get what I need, sacrificing my dreams so I can put food on the table instead, and the loudest asshole in the room getting what he or she wants, and the quiet, kind person getting ignored, and of course, politics. I became some sort of a zombie, lost in thoughts about how I should proceed with my life, now knowing that what my friends from books and TV shows taught me doesn't really apply to my life, at least not always. That made me depressed for a long time, which I still struggle with, by the way. It was like finding out that the most fundamental truth about life is no longer true, and all the values that I held dear seemed to not matter. I dwelt quite a while on the depressing nihilistic thoughts until I hit what you call rock bottom and thought maybe I should compromise and start living my life more pragmatically. Even the sound of the word compromising was so acidic to me, as if the more I compromise, the more it will eat me alive and I'll end up losing all of myself. But what's one going to do to avoid being totally alone and be at least somewhat successful at one's career? There must be some overlap. Trying to stay within that overlap is like walking on a tightrope. Any slip might cause me to fall and I might not recognize myself after falling on the ground. Fervently chasing after that feeling of acceptance in the society or feeling of achievement at my job at the cost of others might cost me what I value and ultimately who I am. Every day I still walk on that tightrope up in the sky, trying to find that slim overlap of upholding my values, but finally living in the real world. Because I don't really have the desire to be on the ground, at least not yet. Thanks.
Thanks, Irene. Next, we're going to hear from Lara Molman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lara. And I guess for context, the day before I moved into college, I was in a pretty serious car accident. And my parents are the real MVPs for not letting me stay home and not letting that get the best of me. But I often felt like because two major events in my life happened really quickly, I often forced myself not to think about anxiety issues I had as a result of the accident. So this piece really helped me work with that. Okay. It's spring break of my freshman year of college, and my dad and I slip into the Ford Fusion in our apartment building's parking lot. I had no intention of ever driving again after my accident, but my parents insisted. Our building sits on a major road that cuts through the heart of our town. The turnout of the parking lot scares me, so I sit in the passenger seat and watch my dad drive us to a nearby residential area, a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and cozy houses that sit close together. Calm down, I tell myself, it won't happen again. When my doctor asked me what it felt like, I told her it was kind of like being naked. A thick blanket of security I didn't even know was there had suddenly been ripped from my shoulders, leaving me in a hyper-cautious and vulnerable state. I fought back tears as I tried to explain, but she told me this was good, so I continued. Each time I crossed the street, entered a moving vehicle, or heard balloons pop or glass bottles hit the ground, I felt all at once entirely exposed and defenseless. I would cringe, close my eyes, clench my fists, and wait for the feeling to pass. Not long after this feeling took hold, I began doubting my own common sense. I convinced myself that if I didn't look both ways 3 times each before letting my feet leave the sidewalk, I would surely miss an oncoming car. If I didn't close my eyes from the passenger seat as my friend made a left turn, my mind convinced my body it would happen all over again. The left window would shatter as the car turned over, and there I would be, hanging from my seatbelt, my tears dripping sideways onto the shirt of my friend who had been driving. My ears were stinging from the blast of the airbag, and my torso was aching from the pull of the seatbelt. People rushed into the intersection, tapped on the windshield, and called 911, but I was screaming, and no one on the outside could hear me. I constantly remind myself that I'm among the luckiest people on earth. The car did exactly what it was supposed to do. It took the impact, the police officer told my parents, who were staring at the vehicle tipped over on its side and compressed like a thin sheet of paper. The emergency room doctor assured me after several x-rays that my pain was simply bruising that would fade in time, some gross black and blue marks and sporadic stiff aches that made it difficult to crane my neck and fall asleep, and that was it. I really was the luckiest person on earth. But in some sense, both the sheriff and the ER doctor, who each gracefully dealt with my family's collective hysteria, were wrong. There was an impact that none of the latest safety features could absorb. There were bruises that wouldn't fade for months, maybe even years. It's been almost 2 years since the accident, and I still find myself clenching my fists as I cross the street and letting out small gasps from the passenger seat in the middle of busy intersections. The most painful part is not the moment itself, but the memory. When crossing the street to meet friends for coffee or in the car on the way home from a movie, the feeling comes back to me unexpectedly. The memory hurts, but I've noticed it's gradually faded. With help, I've realized the most important part of the healing process is to let myself be upset, to let myself remember the accident without obsessing over the fact that I'll never be able to forget about it. In time, I tell myself it won't hurt as much.
Thanks, Lara. Up next, we're going to hear from Morgan Rondinelli.
Hi. For some context, I'm involved with Mental Health Monologues, and this is a piece I performed last year. But since it was a year ago, things are actually quite different from how I described them. So it's called Superpowers. Today I'm going to tell you a secret. I have superpowers. Superpowers I used to save lives several times a day. One of the first times I saved someone was when I was 10 years old. I had put my family in danger and now I had to save them. What I had done to endanger them was I accidentally had the thought that my family might get sick or hurt and die, and I was utterly terrified that unless I knocked on wood over and over and over with perfect precision, ending on a safe number of knocks, then my whole family would die and it would all be my fault. It took close to an hour, but I did it. I saved them every single night for months. You see, when you have OCD, it's not uncommon for your thoughts to give you superpowers. The possibly useful but very dangerous superpower that thinking something could make it come true. As a kid, I was deeply afraid my thoughts could affect the safety of those around me, so I spent hours doing rituals, these weird behavioral and thought compulsions to keep everyone safe. All of this responsibility was really confusing. Why was I so dangerous? Why could only I save them? Why weren't these thoughts and rituals my choice? It would be another decade before I knew I had OCD, but it was already taking up so much of my time, even though I knew with almost complete certainty that just because I thought about something bad happening, it didn't mean it would happen. With almost complete certainty. But mixed in with almost complete certainty, all you need with OCD is one tiny droplet of doubt. Given to a ritual once, the doubt grows a little. Given twice, it doubles. Given 3 times, and it explodes. If you were wondering, my family didn't end up dying any of those nights. And although I occasionally get the urge to knock on wood over and over, I don't have to anymore. That fear faded. But that's the thing with OCD. It is the best shapeshifter I have ever encountered. Once you get rid of one fear, a new one pops up. Then as you work to get rid of this fear, the old one comes back. If you care about anything or anyone, OCD latches on for attack. Everything you do takes longer than it should. And that's because everything comes with a rule book, an enormous rule book detailing what you can and cannot do, and everything you absolutely must do to keep the universe safe from all the destruction you personally could cause. By following a handy-dandy rule book, you too can evade disaster 100 times a day, starting from the second you wake up. First, when choosing what to wear, better not wear anything blue or something bad will happen. Next, be sure to unplug everything in sight and tap the light switch just right before you leave, or the whole building will burst into flames. Next, you better not go anywhere without a water bottle, or you will die immediately. Next, when doing homework, reread that sentence 2, 5, 10, 15 times, even if it takes an hour to read a few pages, so you absolutely don't miss any information. Next, allot at least an hour to get ready for bed. With enough useless rituals, it can easily take that long. Next, spend 15 minutes checking you set your alarm clock so you can be sure you won't miss class and won't be hated. And finally, hope you have enough time left for 6 hours of sleep. 5 is more likely. OCD follows you everywhere. The rule book is extensive, always changing, and the more you give in to the terrorizing anxieties, the more the rule book grows. In my head, I've saved thousands of lives, but does all of this make me a superhero if I can't live my own life? I spend so much time following all of these rules instead of just living and being myself. Yes, disobeying the rulebook is possible if you take it gradually, but it is one of the hardest things you will ever do. And this is why people with anxiety disorders are not cowards. They are some of the bravest there are because they must continually confront what terrifies them. Bravery is what it takes to deal with constant anxiety, and more importantly, to fight back against anxiety so you can regain your life. Maybe that's my superpower. And most importantly, this is what OCD looks like. OCD is not a word that should be thrown around to mean clean, tidy, organized, particular. You should see all the dirty dishes in my room. It's not a trendy quirk, so please stop pretending you want it. As I've been working on my OCD and therapy, I've seen glimpses sometimes of what freedom from looping thoughts of disaster and stressful rituals can look like. And that gives me hope on bad days, like days when the stress of one midterm can take away months of hard work and progress. But I keep fighting back a little more every day because I so badly want that freedom where I can finally live. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. Up next is Brett Graham.
Hi. Everybody else has been giving context. So I was really angsty when I wrote this. I had just asked out a girl. I was like a first semester freshman. And then she said yes. And I was like really pumped. And then she texted me 45 minutes later and retracted. So yeah, it was great. And then I probably turned on some like Blink 182 and wrote this. So it's called Majoring in Modern Romance. Someone at the University of Kansas did a study and found out that only 36% of men know when they're being flirted with. And for women, that number drops to 18%. So statistically speaking, if you're flirting, there's a 6% chance that both of you know what the hell's going on. And to me, this is comforting news. See, my dating history has always leaned on the side of serendipity, inconsistency, and typically a profound disability. You know, thinking that laughs mean more than they do, thinking that smiles from across the room mean more than they do. Walking away from a successful conversation with a pretty girl, hands held high over my head like I won an Olympic medal, 9.2 from the Slovakian judge. Nothing record-breaking, but I'm going for bronze. Point being that I wake up every morning and I look in the mirror and I say, hey there, you beautiful bastard. Go out there and show me some of that MVP God-given talent. But something seems to happen between then and when I sit in bed thinking of her. And it's not just flirting. On the seas of modern dating, I'm in like a small boat with a crappy sail and a bad compass. But it's not even like a boat. It's like a skiff. It's like one piece, a singular piece of wood. So I went to that omniscient oracle of my college existence, the LSA course guide. And with some of the courses that I'm taking next semester, I think that I can make a comeback. See, I'm taking courses like Philosophy 234, Who is Bay? Past and Modern Perspective. This is supposed to be a blow-off class. It's all about Bay as a concept. You know, who is Bay? Is Bay someone that you fool around with and watch Netflix, or could Bay be more? Or is there more? This is a really long title, I'm sorry. It's Math 398, Intermediate Differential Equations and Dynamics, Applications in Emojis, Read Receipts, and Snapchat. It's like text quantity, text quality, deep time, texting theory. Like if X equals the number of multiple line text minus 1/8 the derivative of how long you played it cool and waited between each text, plus the square root of selfies exchanged in one night, all minus the absolute value of screenshots sent to friends for analysis, for what value is X at its maximum? I'm taking COM 153, a friend recommended this. It's the first year seminar in talking as a phase in relationships. The course description is something like this. Together, we will examine the history and function of the modern relationship phenomenon known as talking. Characterized by mutual interest and a startling fear of even the slightest semblance of commitment, this phase has revolutionized the way we view adolescent stages of romance. Through it, everyone can act like they're 13 again. Prerequisites done, 2 papers and a final examination. Complet 247 is Shakespeare's Tinder, adapted love poems, and how not to come on too strong. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven doth shine. Hey, LOL, I liked your Insta. LOL, why didn't you like mine? And then I'm also taking Poli-Sci 389, but because I have like requirements. And you may think that I'm crazy at this point because I know that 17 credits sounds like a lot, but I'm just trying to understand because like what happened to the happy medium between she wants to know too, whoever's calling. What happened to the happy medium between disinterested and desperate? Why does the one who cares less always wield more power in the relationship? And who deemed this idiotic dance of double taps and dodging labels to be the norm? Why is indifference attractive to us? Why is indifference at all attractive? Right now, I have zero interest in a girl who inspires indifference. I'm on the lookout for that other type of individual who makes me want to dive in and forget how to tiptoe, who makes me want to go heels over head rather than with the flow, who makes me want to take back all of the wasted seconds making duck faces and forcing myself to pretend that I'm not interested and use that time to write her a poem. Let me know if you see this girl because I register on Tuesday morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. We're going to hear 2 more stories tonight. Next, we're going to hear from Emma Kinnery.
Okay, I guess I didn't really think of a preface to this, but my name is Emma Kinnery, and this is about religion. I was inspired to write this after coming to the last Story Slam, which is really good as well. Okay. On a good day, there are 50 people in Grace Lutheran Church. Most days there are 30, and perhaps on Easter, Palm Sunday, or Christmas Eve, there'll be a rousing 80. Grace is where my father went through catechism. It's where my parents, aunts, and uncles were wed. My cousins and siblings baptized. It's where the Kinnery boys were infamously grilled on Bible passages in front of the then much larger congregation when induced by Pastor Weber and my much less stress-inducing catechism under Pastor Teskey. It's where I attended every Sunday growing up with my family and grandmother. Grace Lutheran Church is dying. I can say with near certainty it will not exist by the time when the time comes for my children to be baptized. Growing up, the number of other families who came to services dwindled until my parents became the only representatives of their generation and my siblings ours. To be fair, Grace could have done much more to accommodate younger Christians, but it's difficult to do so while maintaining the strict traditional services and competing with larger non-denominational parishes, which tout softball teams, after-school clubs, and sing contemporary tunes. Even I can admit that the live music sing-along words broadcasted on the screen is much more appealing than Grace's off-tempo organ accompanied by a murmuring congregation led by one belting elderly woman. Though that also isn't what draws me to church. I like the boring songs. I like the altar cloths, which change colors to represent a different spiritual season. And whether Owen likes it or not, I like watching my brother light the candles, just as I begrudgingly enjoyed acolyting when I was his age. I've never felt a kinship to non-denominational Christianity, and for this, I've never called myself a Christian. I'm a Lutheran. But still, I don't feel comfortable proclaiming this in my everyday life because I don't want to draw attention to my faith. Religion is a component of my identity, but it's not as essential as it is for others. In my own experiences, often when asked about my beliefs, it's followed by other questions which I don't see as relevant, such as that is evolution or abortion, so I don't talk about it. Being a Lutheran is being serious. Lutheranism was the first denomination which branched off of Catholicism, and many of the traditions are still held, such as service of the sacrament, whose importance is one of the most conservative branches of Christianity. But besides being a place of tradition and support, I don't see the correlation between believing in God and attending services and other politics. Religion to me has always been solely about having a leg to stand on when you're down. Knowing everyone messes up, goes through hard times, and even when everything is falling apart, there's a higher entity that cares about you and accepts you despite whatever mistakes you've made. It's comforting. I don't want to debate evolution with you or the existence of God, and when the Congregation of Grace collectively prays for crisis pregnancy centers, I can't participate. Perhaps this makes me a Lutheran in name only, or perhaps this makes me a hypocrite to you, though you can call me out once you've gone through 2 years of catechism. My uncle was a pastor, and that's essentially all I knew about him growing up. On my grandmother's mantle sits 6 8.5 by 11 high school portraits of her children. Marge Kinnery is staunchly against birth control, and the sheer number of children she had, combined with their great age gaps, is a great testament to that. The first 2 of my uncles, Jeff and Cliff, are in black and white, and the final 2 of my father and Aunt Deborah, color. The resemblance between my dad and Jeff, despite being nearly 20 years apart, is striking. They look identical. I knew Jeff died of pneumonia not long after my parents began to officially date, and they drove together from Ann Arbor to Chicago for his funeral. I knew he was funny, a good storyteller, and a good older brother, who would stay up late at night to tell my father and Deborah scary stories as they laid in their bunk bed. Later, those same scary stories would be passed on to my cousins and I. But the paintings that these details constructed was in the style of the Impressionists. I could see who he was, but it was fuzzy. It always seemed to me as though something was missing. From a young age, even his death confused me. I knew people still contracted pneumonia, but I didn't think it was common for people to die of it. Why didn't he go to the doctor? I asked one day as we stood behind the pew. Being in Grace Lutheran made me think of him. He just didn't take care of himself. My father said, eyes forward in his Sunday best, and that was that. I imagined him lying in bed, coughing, and refusing to go to the hospital. I was in middle school when my cousin spilled the beans to my other girl cousins and I while we huddled in a bathroom a few days before Christmas. Lily whispered, "My mom told me Jeff was gay." What? I didn't know anyone who was gay. Well, I did, but I didn't realize it at the time. It didn't make sense, and I didn't believe her. Isn't it a sin for Lutherans to be gay? Let alone a pastor. But it was true. Jeff didn't just die of pneumonia alone, as they had said. He died of AIDS, which had weakened his immune system and allowed him to contract the virus, which ultimately killed him. I was initially shocked, but as I got older and the more I thought about it, things fell into place. Some things suddenly made sense, but it would be years before I fully understood others, and some will probably never be explained. It's difficult for some of my family members to rationalize his lifestyle and his sexuality with his religious practices. Maybe this is why we never knew growing up, or maybe it was because it was something they couldn't comprehend themselves, and it was easier just to sweep under the rug, something which doesn't need to be revisited posthumously. But other people do. Deborah was driving down I-97 on our way back to the cabin when I asked her about Jeff, and we were both bawling as she told me lots of intimate details about his life, and suddenly he went from being a shrouded figure to my uncle, a person. How close my dad and him were, how funny he was, how much he loved to disco, and how much quieter my father became after he died. He struggled throughout his entire life with his identity, Deborah said. Can you imagine? A year later, I would go back to visit my Aunt Deborah by myself again, and as we drove down the Palisades Parkway, she told me, you know, it's okay not to have the same beliefs or understanding of religion as your parents. At the time, I really didn't understand what she was getting at, but years later, her words in the awkward conversation has resonated with me time and time again. I don't know whether my grandmother knew Jeff was gay or not, or whether she uses her old age as an excuse to forget. It's something she could not understand regardless, but it's something I can. Knowing that he lived the life he lived, committing what is seen as a sin every day while remaining a man of God has given me the courage to interpret Lutheranism in the way I do and see my spiritual beliefs as separate from others. Because my Uncle Jeff lived the way he did, I don't see why there needs to be a divide between the LGBTQ community and the church. So when on a school field trip, I was asked whether I hated gay people because I was a Lutheran. I could respond confidently, I didn't see the connection. I don't really like to talk about religion at all, and I don't like the reality of the situation. That while I view him as a celebrated figure in my own life, for giving me justification to be of a conservative faith and not agree with everything the church stands for and against, my family kept it from me. But just as my aunt has to talk about it, I'm sure others, perhaps even some of you in this room, have to as well. I was talking to my best friend from home about how sometimes it can be difficult grappling with wanting to write about someone or something while knowing it may hurt your loved ones to do so. Without mentioning my topic, she said she understood. She was working on a piece about how her mother slipped out of a Christmas break that her uncle had been gay. Meg's family is Lutheran too, and her uncle, her father's brother, died around the same time that Jeff did. She's been my best friend since the 3rd grade, so I knew his story growing up, and even then we both thought that the alleged circumstances of his death was odd. In my parents' defense, Pneumonia is a much more believable cause of death than disappearing in a sandstorm. In reality, her uncle passed away of AIDS too. After Jeff died, the women in his congregation sewed together all of his ties to create a colorful quilt with a psalm and a cross stitched in red thread. Red, like the words in my Bible that once belonged to him. The ties proudly hang in the back wall of my grandma's living room. Everyone driving downtown can see it through her large bay window, and growing up, people would often ask me about it. What the Ladies of Redeemer Lutheran Church in Chicago's congregation couldn't have known in September 1991, and Marge Kinnery fails to see, is the blatant irony in having an enormous rainbow-striped tapestry as his memorial. I no longer wear a cross around my neck, but I'm a Lutheran, not a Christian. I don't like to draw attention to it, which I guess is why I chose this public forum to talk about it in front of my peers. But sometimes it's important to, because these stories left untold may be paramount to others' understandings. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. For our last story of the night, we're going to hear from Lauren Matson.
Hi. So first I'd like to say congratulations to just everyone who read. Like, can we give everyone a round of applause? That'd be awesome. It's really brave to say all that stuff. So thank you. And to give some context, my name is Lauren, and I suffer from depression and generalized anxiety disorder, as many people have spoken about tonight. And I am going to be reading a poem about what is known as rock bottom, as one of the performers talked about. And this happened about a year ago, so I am doing quite well now, but it was a pretty upsetting situation. So I'm sorry to end on a little bit of a somber note, but hopefully it will bring awareness to some things that people work through. Thank you. It was a perfectly good night as any to watch the sun bow down to the ever-retreating horizon, as shadows cast themselves onto the ground, just as I cast myself upon the chipping, creamy kaleidoscope mess of a bathroom floor. Showers screaming back at me through the curtain, all I knew were the tiny gray chunks I feared would fly out of my head and swirl sickeningly around my body, brain exploding into a maze that I could never pass through, madness I was being thwarted with tenfold. It was a perfectly good night as any to steal glances around the road as a body of metal and gears brought me to my home, to my new numb beginning, for other signs of pain amongst the other sailors of concrete. That night was a perfectly good night to let the universe take over the pain and lead me towards the kitchen drawer of power, of pills. Father standing nearby, making easy conversation, never truly realizing that in my hands lay the beginning of an everlasting night. 5 instead of 1. None instead of 1. That's all I wanted. Honestly, it was as good of a night as any to search around for the white round bodies that would soon find tomb inside my stomach. For would there ever be another that would matter? Mattering was all I could think about in those days when purpose blended with the pungent smell of puke and prowess and the lack of parallel lines in the sidewalks and in my own walk. It was a perfectly good night as any to try an overdose of pain meds and to regret the regrets, to hate the rage, to despise myself, to clean up the mess that is me. It was a perfectly good night as any to learn how to find the exact spot in which the esophagus retches with your finger, its miniature spluttering and edgy gaggy motion bringing up hard bile, but not those little white pills. It was as good a night as any to say goodbye to the sun and hello to the embarrassing sanitary hospital, as the IV bag dripped like the tears that formed in my father's eyes, the pain that stood there and that still stands there sometimes when he looks at me. that point themselves with the tired gasp of his voice, quivering in the dark as he shook with sobs. This, Lauren, your depression, Lauren, is worse than your mother's cancer. Maybe it is. Nights like these make me look down towards the floor that I wanted to float above, that I still want to float above. When seconds butter themselves with uselessness and days pull at my head in a savage fashion. But I pull myself together. I float for a minute in the fear and then sneak away from it until it finds me again sometime later. For that was a perfectly good night to remind myself that living can hurt a hell of a lot more than the words that he whispered to me, more than the nights of physical pain caused by a chemistry experiment, caused by hysteria land that leads to silently screaming until your throat shuts down from the bitter numbness. But tonight is a good night as any to revel in forever of this moment and the knowledge of those to come. No more pills, darling. No more pills for me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to everyone who read. I know we all really appreciate you guys sharing your stories. And thanks everyone for coming. Let's give everyone one more round of applause.